Do you have questions about accommodations being added to your child's IEP or 504 plan and you're not really sure where to start? Maybe you've been at a few meetings and you've heard the accommodations and you're not even sure if they're the right accommodations for your child. This video is for you. My name's Valerie. I'm a former special education teacher and administrator, and now I'm an educational advocate and consultant. And I help families navigate the IEP process or 504 process for their children to ensure that their children have educational access and opportunity and can benefit from the accommodations that are being offered and that they're the right accommodations for their child. Let's get started and let's talk about the 4 different types of accommodations you might see on an IEP and how to know if they're going to be the right thing for your child. And then how you can ask some questions so that you can ensure with the team present that you're doing what's most appropriate for your child. This video is going to be all about accommodations, but if you know you've had questions about accommodations for a while on your child's IEP or 504 plan and you just want to talk to somebody about it, you can click down below. I have a link to take you to reserve an hour with me. We can go through your child's plan and the accommodations, make sure they look appropriate, and talk about what next steps you might want to take around accommodations to ensure that your child is receiving the educational benefit that they're entitled to. For some students, the right accommodations can make or break an IEP or 504 plan, so it's really important that they're right. Let's start with talking about what an accommodation is. So an accommodation changes how a student learns and sometimes how they demonstrate their knowledge, but it does not change what they learn. Whereas a modification on an IEP does change what the student is learning and expected to learn and demonstrate knowledge around. Here's what that might look like. An accommodation could be that your child is learning 3 skills in math and the entire class has to do 30 problems to demonstrate their understanding of those skills. Your child might only have to do 10 to 15 problems as long as they're demonstrating all 3 skills. Whereas a student with a modification might learn only 1 of 3 skills and only need to demonstrate knowledge in that 1 skill. Let's talk about some different accommodations that might happen in the classroom or at school, because an IEP or 504 are covering the needs of your child during their entire school day. Let's start with presentation accommodations. So this would be how information is given to your child in a classroom. This could be utilizing text-to-speech options on like a fiction book. Often textbooks now have this available as well, so a student might be able to utilize text-to-speech. Sometimes when you talk about this potential accommodation, a school team might say that's available for all students at our school, and that is fantastic. I encourage you to still have that written on the IEP, just in case you move or for some reason things change, it's still something that is available to your child if it's needed. Visual schedules could fall under this category as well. Visual schedules look a little bit different at different ages. So in middle school and high school, it could be a list of what is happening that day in the classroom, something like this. And in elementary school, it might be with pictures. It could be at the student's desk or on something that they are able to move when they've done that activity to another side of the schedule. It might be on the board, but also still have picture icons depending on the age of your child and their reading ability and expectation of that grade level. Visual cues and reminders can also be things like utilization of a timer, and timers can look different, right? They can look like this. They can also look like this, and this type of a timer I definitely used even as a middle school and high school teacher. Using a visual cue can really help them to see, oh, I've got 5 minutes left. So instead of me as a teacher needing to say, Johnny, you have 5 minutes left, I was able to say, everybody take a look at the timer, see how much time you have left, because we're trying to build in skills for your children as well so that they know, even when they're not at school, if they're at home, I should set a timer. I only have 15 minutes for this task. Presentation can also be something like giving a copy of the notes to your child. So if your child is in class and maybe has trouble with auditory processing or working memory under executive functioning, taking notes can be really, really difficult. And we want to make sure that your child has access to the information and isn't just trying to memorize all of it, which many students do. And so giving them a copy of notes in class with maybe certain words deleted, or maybe we make sure they have a hard copy of the slides that the teacher is using in front of them so they can just jot down a few words for each slide so they can remember when they refer back to those notes and they're studying. Let's talk a little bit about Response accommodations. So these are accommodations that help your child be able to respond and demonstrate their knowledge in the classroom. If your child is expected to give an oral presentation in front of the entire class, for example, but has anxiety and it's really hard for them to do something like that without stumbling over all of their words, then we probably want to have an alternate way for them to demonstrate their knowledge. So you might see something like can present one-on-one with the teacher, alternate presentation options. And that just reminds the teacher or the team of people who are working with your child that they don't just have to only be able to do presenting to the entire class if that's the option. Graphic organizers can be really helpful. This might be said, they might say this is an option for all students. That's fantastic. We still want it in your child's IEP. You might see use of calculator as an option. I wouldn't encourage use of calculator in like first or second grade, but in middle school where we're really looking, or high school, for students to be able to complete a multi-step problem, use a formula, use algebraic reasoning potentially, and they understand, for example, multiplication, but they don't have automaticity due to some of their learning needs, then utilizing a calculator can really help them demonstrate that higher level math skill without getting tripped up on what's 4 times 8. Another accommodation that can help with responding would be alternate environment for test taking. So if they need to take their test in a separate setting, that would need to be on the IEP or 504 so that they are allowed to do that. Separate setting usually has a much smaller group and is in a place that they feel really comfortable and it's quiet. They aren't seeing their peers complete the task ahead of them, so they're really able to focus. Frequent breaks is one of my favorite accommodations. A couple caveats with that one. It needs to be taught to your child how to utilize that accommodation. Is it nonverbal or verbal cues? Are they expected to say it, or can they just show a card or another agreed upon nonverbal cue? And then how long do they get for the break? So we want to set your child up for success when they're utilizing these accommodations they're entitled to, and that means some explicit teaching so that your child understands how to use them and advocate for themselves in ways that work for them. Frequent breaks can be great for students who have anxiety or just need to have a minute to be able to regulate their nervous system. They might be able to take a break in the back of the room or step out into the hallway if that's safe. I've seen frequent breaks for students who need to be able to use a sensory path for little ones in the hallway so then that they can come back and re-engage in the academic work that is happening in the classroom. Another accommodation for scheduling could be extended time on tests and assignments. And I like this one, again, with some explicit caveats in the accommodation itself. So instead of just saying extended time, it should say something like extended time up to 1.5. That would mean if everybody in the class got 2 days to do a homework assignment, your child gets 3 days to do that homework assignment. But there is an end point. That's really important for kiddos, especially students who struggle with procrastination, so that they know they have to get it done and then they move on. They're not worried about something from 3 weeks ago. That is done. They have to move forward. And then another one can be setting accommodations. This can be things like preferential seating. But what does that mean for your child? So the team would need to make sure they understand what that means and then document that in the IEP or 504. I've had students where preferential seating meant by the door, so that they knew they could leave quickly if needed. I've had students where it meant by the back of the room and students where it meant by the teacher's desk. So it's whatever is right for your child. Another setting accommodation could be noise canceling headphones. Another one could be flexible seating. So being able to have a wiggle seat, or maybe they get to be at a standing desk or at a regular table. So giving your child options of where they sit in the classroom. That's important for a lot of students, not all students. So making sure that that's included in the IEP or 504 plan is really important. A couple more things about accommodations as you advocate and have input at the IEP or 504 plan meeting would be observe your child at home. What do you see? What's working for them? What's not working for them? Some kiddos, when they're working, are always standing. They find a way to stand up when they're reading. They find a way to stand up and move a little bit when they're doing schoolwork. That's important information to share with the team. Does your child do better if they get to run around outside for 5 minutes and then get started on some work? Do they do really well if they do Pomodoro method, 25 minutes of working and 5 minutes off? Do they do best if they get to listen to something like brown noise or lo-fi or no lyric playlists? Maybe you need to write in that they get to listen to something when they're working independently in the classroom. and then being able to talk with the school team about what you see working and what isn't working, and then school team can talk to you about what they're seeing work and not work, so that you both can arrive at what's best for your child. Accommodations should change over time. So your child shouldn't really have the exact same accommodations year over year over year. Kiddos change their dynamic, and so there should be a discussion about accommodations every year. 504 plans are not required to have a meeting every single year, but they can. So having a full discussion around those things is really important. If it gets rushed in the IEP or 504 plan meeting, if there's discussion to just like, we're going to keep what we had from last year, I would encourage you to just say, hey, I'd like to make sure we have a big discussion about that and go over each of them and make sure they're still needed for my child. At the same time, if you're told these accommodations are offered to every child and we think they should be removed from the IEP, have a discussion about that. I don't think your child should have 35 accommodations. It becomes lost in the jumble, but I do think your child should have the accommodations that are needed for them outlined on the IEP, not just, well, this is what all children in our school get. If you were to move or if something were to change at that school, it might not be offered anymore, and you as the parent wouldn't realize that it's not happening. So it's really important to have those conversations and make sure it's included on the plan. And what do you do if you're worried that the accommodations might not be happening? My first question would be, why do you think the accommodations aren't happening? And then my second question would be, or my second thought would be, you can follow up with the case manager or the 504 coordinator and just say, hey, I'm concerned that the accommodations aren't happening in this setting or in this class. Can you please follow up and let me know if they're being utilized or if my child knows how to access those accommodations because of XYZ. So start with a question to the case manager or the 504 plan coordinator and see where it goes from there. If it seems egregious and that it's not happening in any setting and that maybe people aren't even aware of your child's accommodations, you can absolutely ask for a quick meeting to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands what was agreed to at your child's meeting. Sometimes at a meeting you'll hear your child doesn't need that anymore, or we want to drop this because your child isn't using that. I think a great question would be, are they aware that that is something they can ask for? How do you know this is not something they need anymore? I think those are good questions to ask to make sure that we're not just removing things because your child didn't know it was an option. And remember, the accommodations that your child has on their IEP or 504 plan are a right. It is an educational right that your child has. So it's really important to make sure you understand it and that the teachers are offering them and that they're being utilized by your child. If you found this helpful, please give a like. And if you have questions or comments, leave it down below and I'll make sure to get back to you.